For those of you who've read my column, you're about to find out I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. Edwin Halbert was one of those men who always seemed to be a day late and a penny short. Yet while Halbert didn't accomplish everything he set out to do, he did blaze a trail for other men to accomplish what he couldn't. Halbert was a civil engineer and a surveyor, and at times a mine operator. He was a nephew of Henry Earl Schoolcraft, so he knew Schoolcraft's reports. He had read the books of Schoolcraft's 1820 expedition with Lewis Cass to the Lake Superior region. But Halbert was born in 1829, 9 years after the expedition, and he came to the Lake Superior region in 1852, 7 years after the death of Douglas Houghton. Now, Halbert was employed as a surveyor on a section of the Mineral Range State Road between the Cliff Mine and the Quincy Mine above Hancock. And about midway between the 2 points, he began to find significant evidence of a large copper lode, and recording specific survey notes and giving directions, very tight directions, to his assistants, his brother John and Amos Scott. Halbert discovered an enormous copper lode. In 1864, he organized the Halbert Mining Company, with which he produced the funds to purchase the property from the St. Mary's Canal Mineral Land Company. This small company, however, was unable to raise further funds to develop the land that they purchased. At the same time, in addition, Halbert was surveying the road, organizing his own mining company. He was also the superintendent of the Huron Mining Company down on Portage Lake, of which Quincy Adams Shaw was the president. Now, Shaw and Halbert didn't personally know each other at the time, but that didn't stop Halbert from approaching him for funds to invest in this company. Well, Shaw found other investors, and the Calumet Mining Company was organized in 1866 and absorbed the Halbert Company, with Shaw as president and Halbert as the mine superintendent. The Halbert Company was then non-existent anymore, but Shaw and his partners also purchased another area of land just south of the border of the Calumet property. This became the Hecla Mining Company property. So Halbert sent regular and glowing reports back to Boston. Shaw was quick to note that there weren't any monetary returns coming back to match the reports. So he sent his brother-in-law, Alexander Agassiz, to the copper country to find out what was going on, where this money was going. Agassiz at the time was in charge of some coal mines in Pennsylvania, so he had some more mining acumen as a mining engineer and a superintendent than anybody else in the company, and Agassiz agreed to go. Agassiz remained about a month at the mines, long enough to see for himself what was going on, and he wrote, "The value of the mines, both the Calumet and the Hecla, is beyond the wildest dreams of coppermen. But with the kind of management many of the mines have had, then even if the pits were lined with gold, they would be of no use." Agassiz was correct in using the word pit, because Halbert had opened the Calumet conglomerate lode through a series of open pits rather than deep shafts, and the pits continually filled with water. They caved in and nothing was getting done. And another thing that Agassiz wanted to find out what Halbert was doing. Apparently he was acting as a civic organizer. On November 27, 1866, at a meeting of the Houghton County Board of Supervisors, the topic of discussion was the formation of a new township to be cut out from the northern section of Franklin Township, which would be called Calumet Township, the first meeting of which was December 17th for the election of township officers, and Edwin's brother John Halbert became the first township supervisor. And what Halbert wasn't doing was developing the mine, and at the same time he was also falling into debt, and he had borrowed a lot of money from Shaw and used his shares in the Calumet Mining Company as collateral against the debt. Using those holdings of Halbert's shares to advantage, Shaw as the president of both Calumet and Hecla mining companies, had Halbert removed the superintendent. The directors of the two companies voted in March of 1867 to appoint Agassiz as the superintendent of both mines. Agassiz returned to Calumet, and from that time on, the family mines together became the leading copper producer in the United States, and in 1870, the leading copper producer in the world. The mines in the township created by Halbert would be nurtured by a very competent but sometimes very firm hand. For the next 19 months, Agassiz remained constantly at the mines, experimenting with stamp mills. If you'd like to go on to slides 4 and 5. That's the surface plants that he was building was the blacksmith shop. And the next slide shows the housing that he built for the men simultaneously, which shows good substantial housing. He didn't build them cheap. Most of the original houses that he built were square hewn logs and were later rented to the employees who wanted them for very cheap. But while he was developing the mine and the housing communities for his workers, it's often easy to overlook that while he was influencing the town and the mines, he was also, his influence was equally present in the development of Lake Linden, which was quickly growing around the company's stamp mills at Lake Linden, which Agassiz was also overseeing. By 1870, the Calumet and Hecla companies were both on very sound footing, and they were both mammoth copper producers, and the directors of both companies saw the financial advantages in consolidating. In March of 1871, the two companies merged into the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company. At the merging, Shaw resigned as president of the companies, and Agassiz became president of the corporation. Now, from the very beginning, all of this, Agassiz did not want anything to do with company stores. With the exception of two, both privately owned, Agassiz refused to have stores on company property. But as the operations expanded, the population grew as well, a population which began to demand a wider variety of food, clothing, and other goods that just these handful of stores couldn't produce. Stores began to appear at the town site on the north side of the mine. Edward Halbert, still in the area, platted the village that was incorporated as Red Jacket in 1875. We can, if you slide, we're looking at. Other investors hoping to tap into the fringe of the rich Calumet and Hecla's lodes opened mines in areas surrounding the C&H mining and housing properties, as well as Red Jacket Village. With these new mines came additional housing neighborhoods, including Albion, Tamarack, Blue Jacket, Yellow Jacket, and later Red Jacket Shaft. But Calumet Township was becoming a confusing place to be. These locations, along with Hecla and South Hecla locations, became collectively known as Calumet. Adding to the confusion was the creation of a new village to the southwest of the mines, calling itself at first Calumet Village. Platted on land owned by the Laurium Mining Company, its leaders in 1895 changed the name wisely to Laurium. Arthur Turner wrote in one of his books that in a sense Agassiz was the architect of the community that developed around the mines, translating much of his cultural heritage from Europe and New England into decisions that marked the shapings of Calumet. Agassiz's influence created a company town that was much different from the coal towns of Pennsylvania he'd known, or the textile mills towns of New England. For instance, Calumet had a common rather than a park. The open area of land between Calumet Mine and the village of Red Jacket, which you should be able to see in this picture. We're looking at the wrong picture, but that just shows the development of the mine and the housing area, the intensity. The large expanse of land between the mining section and the village of Red Jacket was used for pasturage for people who had cows. And it also kept the neighborhoods and the town site a safe distance from smokestack surface plants and dangerous places to be. Later, this area became Agassiz Park. And again, Agassiz didn't want company towns, or company stores rather, because the business of his company was mining and copper production. Yet while the Shaw and Agassiz families held virtual control over the area, Agassiz was quick to realize that the key to uninterrupted production was a minimum of labor difficulties. So while the village of Red Jacket, immediately adjoining his mine operations and on his property, could have been under their influence, the company policies did not exert total control over the workers or the village. Agassiz remained president of the company until his death in 1910. However, with the mines outproducing all the other Michigan mines combined, he was at the mine less constantly. In fact, he only visited the mines twice a year, personally touring the surface plant that extended nearly a mile, as well as the mines themselves. Trusting hand-picked men to manage affairs, both at the mine and in Boston, he resumed his career as a naturalist. Under Agassiz's leadership, the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company became the premier company. If a man wanted to work for the Lake Superior Copper Companies at all, he wanted to work for C&H. In 1877, the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company became the only company to operate a benefit society in partnership with its workforce. The company matched contributions of its men, which paid compensation for those workers incapacitated by illness or injury. This is another slide that's the influence that Agassiz had in the communities is somebody requesting a sidewalk in the Blue Jacket neighborhood because of the muddy streets. They addressed it directly to Agassiz, not to any of the men of the mine. Agassiz was the father of the aid fund, and when the aid fund showed a significant profit, Agassiz wisely invested the money into C&H stock. The result was a suspension of 3 years of the men's contribution to the aid fund. It showed a great surplus. Under Agassiz, the company built schools and rented them to the school district. A high school was erected in 1905. By 1914, the C&H had built 12 schools at a cost of just under $400,000. Its annual return was $11,000, or 3% of the investment. Agassiz was president until his death in 1910. In those years, he had taken a failing venture, and he made it into the leading copper producer in the world. Beginning with a forested township, Agassiz built what had become an odd combination of industrial complex and residential neighborhoods, and a business district, and stores, its shops, its industries matched the finest of any cosmopolitan or industrial complex in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Brian mentioned Mr. Hobart, who played a very important role, and at the risk of maybe boring some of you with a story that you heard, if I might just interject a story that I heard as a young boy growing up about how the great Calumet conglomerate was actually found. Hobart and I believe some other surveyors were working right in front of where Calumet Avenue or US 41 is, but they were down around where M203 is, and there was a halfway house there, halfway between the Cliff Mines and Hancock. And in those days, you didn't travel very far, very fast. So if you look at that area, you see it's about halfway between the Cliffs and Hancock, about 10, 12 miles, which is about all you could travel in a good day, either on foot or horse on muddy roads. And supposedly Hobart came upon the caretaker of the halfway house, an Irishman, naturally, whose pigs had gotten out, and he asked for help to find his pigs. And so Hobart and his crew went looking for the pigs. And they found the pigs at the bottom of a pit. Well, most of us know that the prehistoric pits were all over the area. Now, Hobart prided himself on being a very sharp geologist and mining man, but the prehistoric miners were probably here 2,000 years before him and found many of the sites where mines in the 1800s and 1900s were developed. So the story has always been that Paddy's pigs really found the great Calumet conglomerate.